welcome back everyone to the Remnant Christian Book Reading channel. My name is Vincent, and today, you know what we're doing. We're going to be doing chapters 7 and 8 of the Elijah Project, part 3. Oh yes, we're right back into it. So, last time we read, by the way, before I say that, if you haven't watched the last one, go ahead and watch it. But the last time we were reading, we read something crazy. You know what it was? That Shadow Man got Elijah. So, after all that craziness, we're here now in chapter 7. And it's titled Going Down. Who's going down? I don't know, but let's get right into it, everybody. You ready? Because I am. Chapter 7. Going down. Mom, Dad, Zach, and Piper stood on the beach, dripping and panting, staring in disbelief at the far shore. Should they try to find a town and tell the police? Or should they head back to Shadow Man's headquarters and rescue Elijah? Not that it made any difference. They were so lost they didn't know which direction to go anyway, until they heard a very familiar voice screaming overhead. Watch out! Actually, two very familiar voices. You watch out! I thought you knew how to steer these things! Piper peered up into the night just in time to see two bodies. Ow! Drop from the sky and kerplash, kerplunk, fall into the river in front of them. Willard and Cody surfaced, coughing and sputtering as they made their way toward the riverbank. Don't worry, he says. Cody was shaking his head. Trust me, he says. I'll find them, he says. Well, I didn't I? Willard argued. It nearly got us killed. Honestly, Willard pushed the dripping hair out of his eyes. Sometimes you can be so picky. Piper smiled in spite of herself, even though everything had gone wrong. It was good seeing them, especially Cody. It's not that she liked him or anything, she just liked being around him, even if her presence did make her 1,000 times more klutzy. Are you two all right? Dad asked. Couldn't be better, Willard answered. Just great. To which Cody, digging water out of his ear, replied, This is obviously a new definition of great. He spotted Piper and gave her a little nod. She nodded back, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. Zach motioned to the sky. Did you see any towns from up there? Willard shook his head. Not for at least 50 miles. Well, Dad sighed. I guess that rules out the police. What about a fortress? Mom asked. Big and long, made out of rock, almost like a castle. Yeah, Cody said. We saw that. Willard agreed. I estimate some 20 miles back down that winding road. Or, Cody motioned behind them, a couple miles straight through those woods. Piper and her family traded looks. They had their answer. What about those handcuffs? Willard said. Any suggestions? Dad asked. Willard dug into his pants. Perhaps this combination picklock bottle opener I always carry will be of some assistance. Again, Piper and her family traded looks. Willard could be a pain, but sometimes, like now, the pain was definitely worth it. 90 long minutes later, they were crouched down in the woods, just outside Shadow Man's headquarters. There's nobody here, Zach said. And he was right. As far as Piper could tell, there were no lights, no movement, nothing. She blew the hair out of her eyes in frustration. They'd just waded through the dark and spooky woods with only Willard's and Cody's flashlights. They just risked being eaten by a bear or who knew what, received a gazillion mosquito bites, and been scratched by every branch and rock in their path, only to discover that nobody was home. I wouldn't bet on that, Dad said. It's a big place. Maybe they've got him hidden somewhere. So are we going in to find him? Zach asked. Dad hesitated a moment, then nodded. You and I will sneak in. He turned to the others. The rest of you stay here where it's safe. If we find anybody, we'll... Mom interrupted. No, I don't think so. He came to a stop. What's that? Mom thrust out her chin in the way she always did when she got stubborn. If you're going in, I'm going in. Judy, Dad said. You know how dangerous it is. You know that Shadow Man can. He's my baby, she blurted out. Then recovering, she took a breath and repeated. If you're going in, I'm going in. I'm not staying here without you. Not when my Elijah is in there. Me too, Piper said as she stepped forward. And you may count us in, Willard added. Dad shook his head. No, absolutely not. It's too... Dad, Piper interrupted. He's my brother. And our friend, Cody added. We didn't come all the way this way just to stand around and be afraid. For a long moment, Dad stood, looking at the group. It was obvious he was outnumbered, and no one would change their mind. He heaved a heavy sigh. All right, then. Piper's heart pounded. She was excited and terrified at the same time. Where do we start? Zach asked. Your mother and I escaped from that door over there. Dad pointed to the far end of the building. With any luck, it's still unlocked. What about surveillance cameras? Willard asked. That's a chance we'll have to take. Just stay low and hope for the best. Everybody nodded. All right then, Dad said. I'll go first. If the coast is clear, I'll signal you. Any questions? There were none. Okay then. He crouched low, took a breath, and started off. Once he arrived, he pressed flat against the wall and pushed open the door to look inside. A moment later, he turned back to the group and motioned them to follow. Zach took off, followed by Mom, Cody, and Willard. Piper brought up the rear. Not because she was scared, but because it's hard running crouched over, especially when you're busy praying for your life. Dad held the door as they entered. It was a cold stone hallway, much like a castle. Up ahead, the hallway split into a T, and a dozen yards beyond that, it split again. We'll break up into groups of 2, Dad whispered. Check every room and be careful. They agreed and for the briefest second, Piper wasn't sure who to go with until... Hey, Piper. She turned to Cody. You're with me, okay? If her heart was pounding before, it was doing cartwheels now. Not only cartwheels, but jumping jacks, backflips, and, well, you get the picture. Fortunately, she was able to swallow back most of the emotion and come up with a squeaky little chirp. Cody grabbed her hand and they took the hallway to the left. 10 feet ahead was the first door. When they arrived, Cody tested the knob. He turned it and pushed it open. Looking inside, Piper shivered. It was dark and completely empty, except for the squeaking of mice scurrying out of sight. Cody turned on his flashlight and took a step inside. I wonder what this place used to be. Piper followed, inching her way into the room. To the right of the doorway, she noticed a switch. But instead of a normal up and down switch, this one was round. Curious, she gave it a little twist. Ah! Cody yelled as the floor tilted. Piper leaped back into the hallway, but the floor tipped so quickly that Cody, who was further inside, didn't have a chance. He lost his balance and fell, clawing at the wood floor as he slipped toward the far wall and the darkness appearing below it. Cody! The floor continued tilting, growing steeper and steeper. Hang on! She cried. She dropped to her hands and knees. Careful to stay in the hallway, she reached as far as she could into the room. Take my hand! He reached out, but they just missed. Piper stretched further, clinging to the doorpost with one hand as she leaned into the tilting room. Cody dug in, half scrambling, half leaping, until their hands touched. Piper grabbed hold and held on tightly as he pulled himself up the floor and finally into the hallway, where he collapsed. Are you okay? She gasped. Yeah, he said, trying to catch his breath. Thanks. Look! She pointed. But by now, the floor was completely vertical, straight up and down, and it still turned. They watched in amazement as the flip side of the floor appeared, complete with a stainless steel desk, black leather chair, and a 6-foot floor lamp. In front of it rested a black leather sofa. Piper guessed the furniture had been screwed into the floor to keep it from falling when it was upside down. But strangest of all, in the center of the room was a weird glass chamber shaped like the bud of a flower, big enough for somebody to stand in. Dad called down from the hall. Are you guys all right? Piper turned to see Mom and Dad running to them. Zach and Willard were right behind. They'd obviously heard the cries. Excuse me. Yeah, she said. We're okay. Suddenly, Mom came to a stop and gasped. Dad reached out to steady her. What? Piper asked. It's where we were interrogated, Dad said. He stepped around the kids and with a breath of for courage, entered the room. It's Shadow Man's office. Never one to be afraid, or think before he leapt, Zach followed Dad inside. He spotted the round switch and reached for it. I wonder what this... Zach! Piper shouted, but it was too late. He turned it and once again, the floor tilted. The other way. Now it was Dad's turn to shout, Ugh! Turn it back! Piper yelled. Turn the switch the other way! But Zach was too busy leaping out of the room to hear. Piper reached past him, keeping her feet in the hall. She stretched around the wall to the switch and cranked it hard the opposite direction. A good idea. Except she turned it too far and the floor reversed the direction, throwing Dad in the air like a pancake. Ah! The floor kept turning, and by the time he landed, it was so steep, he slid into the desk. Ah! He clutched the desk legs for all he was worth as the floor finished flipping, and he completely disappeared. Dad! Zach yelled. What happened? Mom cried. What did you do with your father? Piper fumbled with the switch, turning it back the opposite direction until once again the floor flipped to reveal the high-tech office and Dad hanging onto the desk. He looked over to Piper as he tried catching his breath. He did his best not to yell, but she could tell he was pretty upset. Don't you ever touch that switch again. Piper nodded hard, making it clear she understood. Quite fascinating, Willard said. He stuck his head inside the office and spotted another button on the opposite side of the door. However, I wonder what this one... Don't! Piper cried, but she was too late. Does. Dad braced himself for another ride, but absolutely nothing happened. Well, except for the panel on the wall behind the desk suddenly sliding open. Cool, Zack said as he re entered the room and strolled toward it. I wonder where it goes. Dad rose to his feet and joined him. Be careful, you two, Mom called. They moved closer. With rising curiosity, Willard and Cody took a tentative step into the office. So did Piper. What do you see? Mom called to Dad. It looks like some sort of elevator. Dad stepped into it. Zack joined him. An elevator? Mom asked. Against her better judgment, she stepped into the office as well. Hey, Zack said, reaching to a switch inside the elevator. Here's another one of those round... Don't! Knobs. He gave it a twist. Once again, the floor tilted toward the elevator, giving everyone a chance to... Ah! As they tumbled, bounced, and rolled their way toward the open elevator, one after another, they landed inside. Ugh! Ugh! Your elbow's in my ear! Sorry. Until they were one giant mound of people. And before they could untangle themselves, the panel door swished shut, and the elevator dropped. Wow. That was an interesting chapter. Give me 1 second because my throat is feeling a little hard today. Now, go ahead and write down in the comments, if you want to, what you think is going to happen in Chapter 8. They went down in this elevator. To what? The Lord only knows. But now let's see, so we can find out what it is as well. Chapter 8. The Cave. Piper thought the screaming and falling would never end. But finally the elevator stopped, and the panel door slid open to reveal a cold, dark cave. It might have been a relief, except she hated cold. Dark caves even worse than out of control falling elevators. Dad was the first to step out. When he was sure it was safe, he motioned the others to follow. One by one, they filed out. Be sure to keep our buddy system, he said. There's lots of tunnels branching off, and we don't want anyone getting lost down here. Dad and Mom led the way, followed by Zack and Willard. Piper and Cody brought up the rear. As they made their way forward, Piper began to feel a strange uneasiness, almost as if someone or something was watching them. And then she heard it, a scraping sound behind them. Was it her imagination? It must have been. They continued walking until there it was again. And again. Almost like footsteps. And they were getting closer. Mustering all of her courage, she stole a quick look over her shoulder. That's when she saw what looked like a flash of red fire and two black shadows coming toward them. She screamed. Dad shouted something, but Piper didn't stick around to hear. Seized with panic, she began running. Not forward. There were too many people in the way. Instead, she darted into the first passageway she found and ran for her life. She only looked over her shoulder once, but that was enough to miss seeing the giant hole in front of her. The giant hole that she tripped, stumbled, and fell into, screaming all the way. Mom wasn't sure how far she'd run when Dad pulled them into a small nook of one of the tunnels. Zack and Willard were nowhere to be seen, neither Piper or Cody. Everyone had taken off in different directions. Well, almost everyone. It seemed they were still being followed by the red fire and two dark figures, which soon became visible as the woman with fiery red hair and her two goons. Nice work! The redhead shrieked. He sent us back to find them, and now they're gone. Sorry, can we leave now? The biggest one asked. You're nothing but an overgrown chicken. Sorry, can we leave now? I agree with Bruno, the skinny one said. This place really creeps me out. So, can we leave now? Quiet, the redhead bellowed. As the yelling drew closer, Dad reached into his pocket. What are you doing? Mom whispered. If we stay here, they're bound to find us. So I'll scare them off. With what? He proudly pulled out a pocket breath sprayer. This. Mom blinked, wondering if there was a chance he'd lost his mind. He explained, when I give you the signal, shine that flashlight on me. Now she was sure he'd lost his mind. What? The shouting voices were almost there. Without further explanation, Dad wrapped his hand around the breath spray, stepped forward, and shouted, Stop! His voice echoed throughout the cave. The woman and her goons stumbled to a stop. Dad nodded to Mom, who reluctantly turned on the flashlight. It cast a giant shadow of him against the wall, as he held the breath spray toward them with his index finger pointed out. It looked like a very big man holding a very big gun. Stay where you are! He shouted in his deepest voice. Don't make me use this. It must have done the trick. The goons leapt back, spun around, and ran away as fast as they could. Mom could only stare. When the coast was clear, Dad turned to her and smiled. So, what did you think? Mom shook her head. Amazing. Thanks, he said, then gave his mouth a good spritz of spearmint breath spray. Piper woke up to a pounding headache. She wasn't sure how long she'd been unconscious, but the hard cave floor, complete with rocks jabbing into her back, told her she wasn't exactly dead. At least, not yet. Then there was the darkness. It made no difference if her eyes were open or closed. The blackness was complete, and she couldn't see anything around her. Then she heard the sounds. Whisperings. Quiet, like the wind blowing through leaves. A chill rippled across her shoulders. The whisperings grew louder, eerie and haunting as they echoed against the cave walls. She reached into the darkness for her flashlight. It had to be there, somewhere. Excuse me. I'm very sorry. All right. She reached into the darkness for her flashlight. It had to be there, somewhere. By now, the whisperings were so close, she could almost hear words. She scraped a rock with her knee, and the whispering stopped, just a few feet away. Where was that flashlight? Where had she dropped it? She could hear breathing now, quiet, and very close. At last, she felt the flashlight. She grabbed it, making sure it pointed the right direction. Her fingers searched for the on-off switch. There it was. The breathing was practically on top of her. She took a silent breath of her own. It was now or never. She let go a blood-curdling scream while snapping on the blazing light. 3 pairs of boys' eyes widened like saucers. The pair with the glasses rolled up into the head and fell out of sight as Willard hit the ground with a dull thud. And that is the end of chapter 8. Well, that was interesting. But what is this cave that they're in, huh? Hmm, interesting. Interesting. We'll see what happens in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I apologize for the coughing. I don't know what's going on. I guess my voice is giving out. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you really enjoyed it. And go down in the comments if you so wish. And please write down your predictions of what is going to happen next. Do you think that they're going to save Elijah? Or do you think Shadow Man will win? Only time will tell. Well, thank you all for watching. God bless you all. And remember that Jesus loves you. Bye-bye.